I love this announcement. The broadcast is now starting. And luckily, all of us is here. So good morning to the third, I think now, session of the Energy Transition Series. We're addressing a topic that is of super high importance, and I'm jumping back between different events this morning, one with the German presidency that is debating what to do for the renovation wave. And while they are still debating on that end, we have two solution providers here with us this morning. That's Kristofer Fichtner from Ecoworks, but he's also a known face in the area of serial investors. He has been working in founding Termondo in 2017 and has moved onwards from there. And then we have Paul Kenny, who is the CEO of Tipperary Energy Agency and who is one of the people that is on the ground helping other people to renovate their houses, at the moment in the hundreds, but hoping to move into the thousands. And I think this is what we have in common today. We want to enlarge this business model because we think that it's impossible to renovate 115, 120 million European buildings in a bespoke, custom-made pattern. And that's what's happening today. If you want to renovate your building, you have to find an installer that knows what they're doing, or a knowledgeable architect, or both. Then they may not talk to each other properly, and you run into all kinds of problems when it comes to the quality of the plan and the quality of execution. And this, I think, these two guys that we have here, Paul and Kristofer, want to change. We will also be joined later by Karine Laffont-Eloire, who is the consultant at Dowell Management and who was the coordinator of the Stunning project. And the Stunning project looked at what is happening on the European level when it comes to mass style industrial renovation. So what are we facing? We have a stock of 115, 120 million buildings. If you believe in the World Business Council, in the World Green Building Council, sorry, then about 80% of these buildings will be here in 2050. So we cannot hope that they will simply be renovated because they will be torn down beforehand. And that means around 80 million buildings need to be renovated. The current renovation rate is at 1%. That is not enough. Don't misplace that with the boiler replacement rate, which is a completely different animal. It's higher, but it's also not delivering anything when it comes to real significant CO2 emission savings. And we are facing a sector that is largely fossil. 70% of all energy used comes from fossil sources, and 70% of that again is imported. So it's not only fossil, it's also shoveling money out of Europe while we speak. So then we have a topic at hand that is not very sexy. Heating and cooling is supposed to work. People do not want to invest a lot of time and money on it. It's not as good as your new car. It's not as good as your photovoltaic system. You can't show your neighbors. So there's no prestige in having a better heating and cooling system. And I think this is just one, some of the problems that the end user is facing. So without any further summary from my side, I want to jump into the discussion with the people that know much better than me what really needs to be overcome to multiply the efforts and to address these 80 million euros. So we would start with Paul. You have been running these mass renovation of individual buildings, as you dub it on your website, at scale now. But you have also told me in the previous discussions that we need to multiply the daily renovation rate by at least a factor of 10, if not 100. So what would you say we need to do? Is that even possible?
It is certainly possible. I think what's very clear to me, we need a couple of pillars. I think if we think about this mass industrial renovation, we need low-cost finance across the EU that is long-term, because this isn't necessarily a cheap thing to do for homeowners. We need skills in the construction sector so that we can increase the rate of renovation, and we've lots of competition in the market. And thirdly, we need this kind of, you could call it a one-stop shop, you could call it government programs, you could call it whatever you need, but something that supports homeowners and ensures that when they decide to do a renovation or a building owner, they get what they pay for, that systems work, that they're designed well, that there's competence in the market, that they get some independent advice, and you end up with a supply chain that does the right thing for the right reasons. And they're the three kind of big pillars, I think, to get mass renovation. I think there's also a very important thing that we could do at an EU level is is to think about how we signal to the market that we're going to phase out the use of fossil fuels for low-grade heat. So things like saying in 15 years' time in Upper Austria, they are phasing out the use of kerosene for heating. So they've given everyone and every citizen and every business a very clear opportunity to not be caught out. So don't buy a new fossil fuel heating system today, because in 15 years, before it's at the end of its life, we're going to take it away from you and we're not going to give you fuel for it. So it's signaling to the market in a no-cost way from a government point of view that you need to move in a different direction. And I think that that will be a very powerful signal and cost nothing. And thirdly, I think, you know, we could do things. We've just heard some discussion about removing or reducing the VAT rate on electric vehicles across the EU. And I think we should be doing the same for heat pumps. I think we should be doing the same for insulation, PV panels, ventilation, and I suppose the building blocks of building renovation. So what we do in Tipperary in Ireland is we run a one-stop shop. There's lots of talks about one-stop shop across Europe for home renovation. So we market to homeowners, we audit the buildings, we procure contractors, we manage the renovation, we ensure quality control. We design as much of the scheme as we possibly can, and we process any grants or finance that's available. We don't have a good finance package. We want to get there. And when we do get there in terms of scaling up, you know, I'm very clear what our path is from a scaling up point of view. I'm very clear what the market can do, you know, in terms of improving the supply chain, training new retrofit advisors, engineers, plumbers, plasterers, you know, increasing the capacity to deliver. And really supporting that development of the construction sector for deep renovation, because what we really need is that customer engagement model that allows the construction sector to do what the construction sector knows how to do, but do it in the right way. Because people know how to install windows, they might not know how to install windows with air tightness. So there's a small additional element of training that needs to happen. And I think if we get those elements and those building blocks right, we will really capitalize on this kind of industrial approach to deliver retrofit.
Thank you very much for that introduction. Kristofer, your brain has been occupied with the problem for many years. When you started Temondo, you looked at changing the whole way boilers were installed, but that apparently was not enough for you, so you did something else and you started now Ecoworks, and you're looking at multiple family residency buildings. So it's slightly a different angle than Paul's, and probably also a different challenge. If Paul has to convince an end user, you cannot address the end user, right? Because everybody I know that lives as a tenant in a multifamily building, they say, oh, it's my building owner that does this. I have nothing to do with it. So what's your challenge?
Yeah, it's totally right. We cannot directly address the end user of the building. And it's also the end user's dilemma, because he has to pay for all the fossil fuels that goes through the heating system, especially in centralized systems where they can't make any changes to it and they're just being charged. What it looks like right now, they will also be charged part of the carbon pricing that's going to come up. And so the decision maker here is building owners, usually bigger real estate companies who own thousands, 10,000s, up to hundreds of thousands of apartments. And then they will usually own building blocks built after the Second World War, like 50s, 60s, 70s. So a lot of new construction waves of multifamily homes. And a lot of them have not really been touched in the recent years. And we also see this very low renovation rate in these buildings. So they're using a lot of fossil fuel to replace all the heat in the building that they lose in the cold winter days through the facade, the windows, the doors, that installation. And then they use radiators that they can hardly replace or change. So they need quite high temperatures in those radiators. And that makes it extremely hard for them to use heat pumps economically right now. Because what you usually try to do is use like big heating surfaces, like heated floors, to have a low temperature that you need, and heating pumps can be quite efficient. But if you force them to do big temperature elevations, go through them, it's very tough for a heat pump, and it makes it a bit inefficient. So you need to kind of do two things. You need to first insulate the building on a really high standard, and then also supply it with a new heating system, heat pump based. Ideally also have solar PV on the roof to generate enough electricity for the building. maybe use batteries and to provide tenants with electricity, and have like a whole started approach about net zero, like produce as much energy through the year that you need through the year for consumption of the tenants.
But what you're proposing it would be an electric building in a way. I mean,
it is, yes. Technically, it is. We get rid of all the fossil fuels here, and then try also to have an energy balance throughout the year that we can get along with, and then maybe in the longer run also talk about seasonal storage, because we're facing the same problems everybody else is. And the winter days, we need a lot of energy and heat in the building, and there's only little sunshine we need to take from the grid, and on these sunny summer days, we have too much electricity we need to feed in. So adding some kind of seasonal storage will also be a technical thing we need to do. But generally speaking, we're talking about these multifamily homes that have in the past years faced a rather cumbersome refurbishment process where you as the building owner will usually go to an architect or an engineering office, and they will help you and provide some guidance and make plans, but then you usually subcontract like a roofer, somebody does the windows, somebody does facade insulation, and then maybe they do them one after another and at the same time. It's a long, tedious process for the tenant, very cumbersome for those. And what we've seen is the Energiesprong project in the Netherlands, who do like prefabrication based retrofits. So you do a 3D scan of the building, and then you design a new building shell for the building, where you can also already integrate technology. For example, if you do very high level insulation, you need to make sure that you have some kind of ventilation to get all the humidity out, otherwise you get mold. And what you usually do is then first you install insulation, and then you drill new holes through the insulation, build ventilation systems to get rid of the humidity. And that's a cumbersome, slow process. So we said, okay, how much can we put into the facade element and prefabricate it and have it in a factory design, and then just install it to the building to shorten the on-site construction time that is very, very annoying to the tenant. So in that kind of way, also addressing the tenant as an end user, because he benefits from a better and faster and more easy on him renovation process. But then also to reduce errors. I mean, if you look at how manual installation works, you're gluing these EPS panels to the wall, put some new plaster on it, then somebody else comes to exchange the window. And it becomes kind of difficult and hard to make it airtight, as Paul said, right? And that is also causing a lot of troubles with the buildings later on in the coming years. That's why also insulation has such a bad reputation. And that's what we're trying to solve with prefabrication.
I see Paul nodding. So, I mean, is there an exchange between the two of you? Would these type of prefabricated elements be useful for the type of buildings that you renovate, Paul, too? Yeah, could you help each other?
Yeah, I think what's really interesting is the innovation going on in the construction sector, whether it's the prefabrication of whole elements or the lots of innovation around different elements being put together. So, you know, depending on the type of building, depending on the I suppose the construction methods that the building is made from, there's certainly elements to kind of improve. It also matters, you know, in terms of the climate. So, you know, we in Ireland we've quite a mild wet climate, so moisture control is a huge issue, whereas in Scandinavia moisture generation is what is needed. So we have different challenges around the different building stock and the different methods and things, but I really see such an opportunity for the construction sector to really identify where all of these little pinch points are. You know, whether it's you know building systems that are much quicker to install because they're prefabricated or easily assembled or all of those sort of things. But ultimately, in my view, you need an expert in a building to tell or to pick the menu and to put that menu together. And what Kristofer mentioned, really interesting, it was, you know, go to an architect and the architect can sit down and you know, read through everything and so on. Whereas if it's flipped the other way around and the architect firm is going to, or the advisor is going to the building owner and saying, my output is you renovating this building. How do I do that quicker, faster, cheaper, and really trying to do building after building after building and building a supply chain and the momentum, and you can consider it being near to a precision investment in each building. So we need to turn it around from the homeowner or the building owner or the building management company trying to figure out what it is, to a sales process where multiple vendors are trying to attract that building owner, and then the building owner also having the incentive of higher fossil fuel prices, of phasing out the use of fossil fuels. And that's what we kind of need to do, because that's what's going to really spur innovation. And that's what's really, if we can create the push from the building owners, and then we can create the pull from the supply chain, where it's coming packaged, ready. It's a ready made for renovation.
So you're saying we need a new type of competition. We need to move the competition out of I'm putting your boiler in and this is my product, into I'm renovating your building and this is my product, and then let's see who can do this the best. I'm
net zero in your building. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, no, it changes the supply chain quite a bit. So, for example, what we're doing now is on larger buildings, obviously, right? So minimum 1,000 square meters, because below that, the project overhead right now is too big. Doesn't make sense for us. Technology moving forward, costs coming down, we'll eventually put it in a place where we can do it for single family homes as well. Even those that are not the same. The Netherlands, they have these single family house parks where you have like 200 houses all the same. That's easy right now, but look at all these individual buildings. That's where we're going. But it also changed the way that we buy products. So for example, looking at the heat pumps manufacturers, they used to sell the product to a wholesaler, who then sells to a craftsman, who then sells to a building owner. Everybody tries to make the cut in the way, and they usually have a hard time optimizing for a whole system. Now our approach is to say, okay, we're gonna build this new building shell around your building, but we also integrate some sensors, for example, on window opening. And then we invest on our balance sheet into an energy system. We buy the PV panels, put it on the roof, we buy the heat pump, we own it, we own the battery, and then we operate the whole system together with the sensor data from the building, knowing the humidity levels, knowing the temperature levels in the building, knowing what windows are open, and then having the chance to run it as an operation system for those buildings. That is also a valuable position that is not very often seen right now, because they usually try to sell a device and not a solution. And I guess that has to fundamentally change.
You see the same, Paul? Is that also for you the problem? Are you selling a solution, or are you selling a combination of individual devices?
We're selling comfort, which is really interesting. We sell to individual homeowners. We don't put it on our balance sheet. It's very much on the homeowner's balance sheet, and we come at this from the bottom up. So like what we do is we approach individual buildings with expertise, and what we're trying to now is trying to figure out how to make that quicker, faster, cheaper. How do we take that from 15 or 20 days for supervision of a large project down to 10 days or 5 days? And how do we improve the capacity of all of the different elements to be easier, faster, and more robust in terms of being able to scale up, which is kind of the complete different direction from Kristofer, but all of the language he's using is exactly the same as I use, because what you're trying to do is optimize an operating system. We're trying to make the operating system be robust, and you can do whatever to the operating system and it still saves a lot of money and still works very well. And my guess is that's part of your business model as well, making it as intelligent as possible so that it works without intervention. So I think when we look at all of those things, it's about stimulating this completely. Like, if we do the same business models as we've always done, we will get 1% renovation rate, and it will take us until my kids are 90 before we renovate Europe's buildings, which isn't enough. We need to rapidly increase. So we need different business models. And I think, I look at the world of automotive. I look at the world of consumer goods and telephones and so on. And we talk about behavioral economics, but they just use sales techniques to make these things attractive. Thomas, you mentioned, a heat pump isn't sexy. No, it isn't. But I tell you, a warm house is, particularly now that we're all in them all the time. And I think when we get to next winter, I think demand for Kristofer's products and my products are going to go up, and you're in the Heat Pump Association, because people are going to realize that if they spend a lot of time in their buildings, they want them to be healthy and they want them to be warm. And they, you know, I think we're going to see a lot higher fuel use in Europe's buildings if we're all in those buildings for the winter.
Can we touch the technology for a second, since we are doing this as the Heat Pump Association, and we see that heat pumps are an integral part of this. If I give you the floor, what would you need from this industry? What do they need to develop to make your life easier?
Well, we already started talking to the heat pump manufacturers, like when we started with the business, mostly about the question of, can they supply us with prefabricated solutions that pre-mounted, ready to plug and play? Because usually the way of going to the basement of the building, taking out the old oil jet boilers or taking the gas boilers out, and then manually reinstalling new systems is a slow and cumbersome process. And I mean, Tamondo is, I think, we know, 20,000 heatings installed, right, in this process. And it needs to be that way in single-family houses, because you usually don't have that much space outside to put a box. But if you look at these bigger multi-family houses, they usually have kind of a lot of space between them, and you can easily put a little containerized box with everything pre-installed and just connect it to the building and get it running. It saves you a lot of potential error sources in the mounting process, makes it a lot more faster. And if you have the same system and just like 2, 3, 4 variations to it, it's a lot more scalable. And you can talk about like a really being an industry supplier, and you as an OEM deliver a device that is ready to be plugged in and run. And then also you deliver like a service level agreement, say, hey, this is going to be working as long as you refinance it and your contract goes. In our case, it's 15 years. So what we're trying to buy and already succeeded to buy now is a 15-year fully serviced device. And that seems to be rather new for the industry, at least in the smaller devices. I mean, in the large scale business, maybe, but in the residential, smaller scale, this is kind of a new thing, at least in Germany. And I would just like to see it happening a lot more, because in the end, it comes about what is the total cost of ownership for providing the energy with that system. And it's not about a single data point in that heat pump, like the maximum power or the maximum COP or what is the lowest temperature it can go to. I don't really care. I care about the TCO over 15 years of the thing. It needs to be working. I need to have the supplier who sold the device to me taking care of it working. And I don't want to have an installer in between who doesn't really have a right incentive system for it going on.
Can we get the same?
Really,
do you want a 15-year service device, Paul?
I do. Well, I think I already have a 15-year service device, and what I think we need to do in the heat pump industry, and I've said it before at your conference 3 or 4 years ago, I put a big picture of the world's biggest pie, and I said the heat pump industry needs to work together to grow the size of the pie and stop fighting over the slices of the pie. We have a very small market share in heat pumps of our total heating systems, and I think the industry doesn't collaborate on the challenges. So, you know, I hear it continuously across Europe. Heat pumps are hard to install. They're all very different. You know, the installers find it challenging to install and challenging to optimize. You know, we need to think about, you know, significant investment in the supply chain. You know, I look at the oil and gas boilers in Ireland. You know, they have a really robust mechanism of ensuring the supply chain works. We don't see that as easily in heat pumps, and we don't see, you know, a really robust negotiation with governments. In Ireland, the wind industry, they insure their machines for 15 years for the finance. You buy a machine, you buy the finance. You buy the insurance and the finance. What we need to see is really robust collaboration at a national level, funded, I'd say, from a European point of view. Really robust market development and market engagement, where, you know, standards that governments are bringing out for installations, that there's really robust engagement with all levels of political society. You know, it shouldn't be up to me to bring our politicians to show them what a heat pump is, because I did that last year, and I had our parliament visit a house in a school with heat pumps that they had never seen a heat pump. They didn't even know what it was. Where is the heat pump industry? Why is the heat pump industry not working to improve the view of, like, to improve the industry. And the reason they're not is because they are fighting over the slice of the pie. And it kills me to see this across Europe, that there isn't more collaboration. You know, I'm not going to argue about the difference innovation in the different products and services or whatever it is, but and there are better and worse heat pumps, but also, you know, the challenge with heat pumps is the installation. The machines work. We all know the machines work. They're built in a factory. And if there's something wrong with them, the supply chain is there to fix them, which is very rare. The big challenge is about, you know, consumers. If they buy a heat pump, they are not guaranteed that they will get a heat pump that will work because the installer puts it in backwards or does something incorrect. Now it's getting less and there's work happening, but that's my view. If I say to the heat pump industry, I say get the 20 biggest companies, put their heads of them in a room and say, how are we going to deliver a market share growth that's significantly higher now? How are we going to eat the boiler's lunch?
Yes, this is I'm very sympathetic to this argument, as you but I can share with you also that we do have a challenge with the people that want to sell the boilers. And if you have seen the communication on one of our other associations, they have just requested to the European Commission that boiler replacement, so the product replacement, should be in the focus of the action as compared to the renovation rate. So the product replacement rate is now in the focus versus the renovation rate. And I think we are coming from a different angle. But I see Karine Laffont-Eloire. Thank you for joining us this morning. It is quite strange, right? We are all so busy, despite the fact that we're not traveling anymore, that you can say, I have to run to another online meeting now. I imagine around the clock. But Karine, you have been managing the Stunning project, which is a very apt name, I hope, for the enlightening that you have experienced during the process. What do you think is available on the European level to renovate Europe, and maybe even in the end, do we have enough solutions to provide advice to the European Commission when they're preparing their communication on the renovation way, which is expected to come out in September?
Yeah, I think all the ingredients are here. Now we just need to find the correct recipe to help scale up renovation. So our project that you mentioned, Stunning, which was an S2020 project, actually focused on the business models for renovation, not the technologies themselves. And what we found out is that the customer journey still really need to be simplified. It's still too complex today. So although the technologies are available, it's still very complicated especially for homeowners to undertake this renovation journey.
I think this is a great start, because this is exactly what your co-panelists just said. So where do you think is the best customer journey that you have experienced?
Yeah, so also that was one of our conclusion, is that there is no fit for all business model or customer journey. It will really depend on the target. So who the customer are, their country, the type of house or building they occupy. And so the best business model will be adapted to this customer segment. So, but overall, in the project and in the different workshops we organized or to which we participated, one-stop shops are usually put forward as the best way to simplify customer journeys. And then you can have all kind of different one-stop shops. But the idea is to have one single person that will liaise with the customer, and that will organize all the renovation journey around that. And so this single point of contact will then interact with all the different stakeholders, so the installers, the suppliers, the third-party financing part, financing organization, sorry, local authorities if it's relevant, and so the customer himself doesn't have to go to all this person on its own.
And have you also looked at multifamily buildings? Because we have here Paul on the one hand from Super Homes, who is doing more the single family building renovation, and Kristofer, who is focusing more on multifamily buildings. Would you say the same applies? Because I could imagine that the renovations journey in a multifamily building is very different from the one that is in a single family building. And I guess this is what we unearthed before you joined us.
Yeah, and absolutely. Then it also depends on the status of ownership of the building, whether it's social housing or condominiums. Those two cases are very different. In the case of social housing, you have a single building owner who has a very long-term vision of its building stock, so the strategy will be completely different. But when you deal with condominiums with multi-ownership, it's indeed very complicated because there are complex decision mechanisms. But in those cases, you can have housing associations. No, how is that called? Sorry, the English name doesn't come to my mind, but the organization in charge of managing the building. Those organizations can help to facilitate the process. And in France, for instance, and I think in other countries as well, there have been experimentations to facilitate the role of those organizations in convincing the different building owners to undertake a massive renovation. But again, they need to be supported to really simplify their adventure with regard to renovation. First, to understand what are the messages they need to convey to the building owners, because if they talk only about energy saving, it's unlikely it will be successful. They have to put forward first the gain in comfort, the potential gain in property value, and other co-benefits that are brought by renovation. And then they have to be supported to find their way in the complex landscape of incentives and financing support.
That's interesting. I mean, yeah, go ahead. And I just wanted to say, we did not prepare this like this. You know, you weren't here, but Paul and Kristofer said exactly this. The message needs to be different. The last thing that you mentioned, financing. Paul, Kristofer, do we have a financing problem really, or is there enough money available to finance the building renovation? And then if I say enough money, what about data? Do we know how big this cake is that needs to be eaten?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I think the finance situation in Germany is a little bit better than it is in Ireland. So I'll speak for Ireland, but also I think it's relevant across the EU. I think a lot of financial organizations don't actually understand what we talk about when we say deep retrofit. I've been engaging through Super Homes 2030 and before that with financial institutions, and it's clear that they don't understand the impact on homeowners. There is lots and lots of European banks that are afraid to lend, and maybe I'm incorrect in saying that, but I think the customer journey from a lending point of view has got worse over the last 10 years. I think they went too far, maybe up to 2008, and now they're very much concerned. So I do think we need to see more finance in the hands of homeowners and contractors. I think we need to see understanding of the various different risk sharing mechanisms that isn't out there in the banks. You hear it in Brussels, and you know there's a huge sustainable finance summit there in February, but that isn't in the marketplace in banks, certainly in Ireland and across Europe. And finally, I think you know we have a situation where we need to understand customers' acceptance of that finance, because I think there is still a negative view of financing things that There is a problem with finance, but it isn't the availability of money, because there's more money washing around the global financial system than there ever has been. And it's looking for a home, and it's looking for a secure home with a reasonable return. Retrofit has to be that market. And Kristof, you might have a different view.
From the German market, I would say financing of refurbishment projects is an easy way to get. The question is rather on the duration of all these financing methods, because usually you will see very long payback times. It's an investment for not 5 or 10 years, but rather like 20, 30 years you're looking into. So you would usually need to realign the investment duration, the contract loan duration, to the payback time of what you're doing here. And that works out for a lot of the building renovation that's going on. It works out for part of the energy assets. So when you're a heat contractor, you will usually try to get the payback for your heating system or the whole energy system in the retrofit in the contract duration that's capped at 15 years right now. But when you look at the energy side of the building, not only from heat, but also electricity, then the caveat comes up that we are bound to a maximum duration of a 1 year electricity contract. So you can't bind a tenant for longer than 1 year in the contract, but you can't refinance the PV system and the changes to the electricity system in the building for only 1 year to have a payback. So that doesn't really match together. You need to make sure that you have longer contract durations and longer financing available. And then I guess everything is totally fine. Germany might be especially because we put a lot of subsidies through financing instruments with a KfW.
Well, maybe we will get a lot of more subsidies now, because one of the questions in this other session that I jumped out to come here now was, what should we do with all this money, EU recovery money, 2.3 trillion euros? Mr. Herran is there from the German Ministry for Economics and Energy, and he said that in Germany 130 billion euros are now earmarked for the recovery action. 50 million that he called is the future of everything, so also the future of heating. The German situation as it stands, the German subsidies allow for a 45% subsidy, a grant, if you kick out your oil boiler and put in a heat pump. I know in France they have this option of the coup de puce, where you get basically by combining all the different subsidy schemes, the opportunity, if you are in a low income bracket, so we talk about affordability, to have a heat pump for €1. And now I understand we are jumping back between a single family house and a multi-family building, right? But the question would be, there is a lot of money available. Are we using it in the right way, or is there still other obstacles that make the money not accessible, even though it is out there? I could mention the RHI in the United Kingdom, one of the most generous subsidy schemes ever, and impact on the market close to zero.
Yeah, I can maybe share the lessons learned from a one-stop shop that was created in France targeting single-family houses. So they can provide third-party financing. They act as a one-stop shop, as a single point of contact. So they really have made their best to simplify the customer journey and scale up renovation. But despite this, the demand for renovation is very low, and they have very few customers. So now they are putting more effort on the marketing side and the messages to sell renovation, because they see that financing and technology is not the issue. Is really convincing the homeowners to take the first step and embark in this what they see as a very complex journey, because there is, I think, well, still unfortunately a lack of trust in installers, in technologies, in the real savings, and this is a barrier that needs to be overcome.
Yeah. I would say that these subsidies are an important pillar to get going. What we also see is a shortage of skilled labor in construction installer work, and depending on where you are and what region in Germany, it's not about being able to put up the money for a new heating system. It's about getting an appointment with an installer. That can take you weeks or months for somebody to come along to give you a price quote. So I'd say, yes, it needs subsidies, but it also needs a fundamental change in how we do this approach. And I guess prefabrication, that's what we're betting on here, is a very important way going forward to get along with the limited amount of skilled labor that you have available, because you can't triple or quadruple the refurbishment rate with the same amount of people doing it if you don't change technology.
Kristofer, you are in an area that is called Proptech. It sounds so great, yep. But in the end there is some bricks laid. But I think what you're just addressing, is that not something that this Proptech industry has promised to solve? We have a certain amount of skilled craftsmen, but they are not necessarily doing the right thing, as Paul said. They may be able to put the window in, but they don't put the ceiling properly. So how can data, augmented reality, sensors help us in solving that issue where we guide the craftsmen to do the right thing faster, ideally?
It does start with very, very simple things. You don't even need to have VR to go for AR. With Tamondo, what we did is, usually when you get a price quote from a heating installer, it's the master craftsman himself coming out, doing the appointment with you, checking your hands, taking the notes. So the guy who knows best how to install the system spends time selling it to you. That doesn't make much sense, right? So we separated it and had a lot of this smartness that the seasoned installer has in evaluating the building, putting together the system, and put it into an IT system that somebody with a little bit of training could then control and guide that the homeowner to, and help him find the right solution, make the right decisions for us, what to install, how to combine it. So putting the skilled labor on where it is needed is kind of the first step, I would say. It's a very simple step, but it's an important step to take. And then it comes to technology for sure. When you try to sell things that have an aesthetic approach, so nobody really cares about how the body looks like, right, or the heat pump looks like. Maybe the outer part of it, but when it comes to the renovation and like a new building show, people would like to see what the house is going to look like afterwards, right? So having tools that can easily show them how the building will look like, make it easier to engage, say, oh yeah, this is what I want. That could help for sure. But yeah, generally what I'd say is make sure that the craftsman and installer only does what they really need to do, being on-site installation work, and put as much of the overhead and handling process into other hands, and as much as you can in pre-construction.
I think one of the, you started the question, Thomas, with, you know, in terms of the Green New Deal, what should we use our subsidies for? You know, I think there's definitely a case, you know, the business case has to be there, you know, and whether the payback is 15 years or 10 years or 12 years or whatever, that is important. And that's where the subsidy or the carbon tax should be used. And I would favor more of the carbon tax, because that pushes the market rather than pulls it. But I think really importantly, we need to completely review the way we structure our economy. You know, how have we got a situation in Europe where there is structural weakness of unemployment, and in another part of Europe we have absolute chaos in skilled tradespeople? You know, we really need to think long and hard about ensuring that the apprenticeships, that the training, that all of that sort of stuff is mobilized by the state and by our governments, particularly in the places where there is structural unemployment. Because, you know, there is a clear thing in my head, and I absolutely see the opportunity is there to, you know, we're talking about digitization and people losing jobs as taxi drivers. We're going to see automation and stuff. You won't be able to automate the master craftsman. You never will. And while we might be able to reduce the amount of time he needs to spend per building by 30 or 50% by offsite construction and so on, we need to rapidly increase it. So we need to think about right now, can we review the way we do apprenticeships? How do we train and upskill the structural changes of our economies from where they are now to where they need to be? Because, you know, fundamentally, you cannot say that we have had an average unemployment rate in Europe of 10%, and in another part of Europe we don't have enough employees for years, for decades of trained people be lacking. So, you know, we need to think about that at a European level and at a national level, saying let's end unemployment by upskilling that. Because if we upskill enough people to become plumbers and plasterers and so on, that means that the contractors who are delivering our renovation have competition. It means they pay less per euro per hour for an electrician or a plumber or an engineer. It means the engineer has less risk. There's more work. You know, we need to think about how do we move on the agenda. And I think this coronavirus stimulus package should be, yes, stimulus for work, but also stimulus for the marketing of the energy transition, of better public policy, but also a huge chunk into training and skills.
So maybe we need a new professional journey. No, it's not the customer journey, but a journey for somebody that is 16 years old. So you're 16 years old, what should you do? And if you have no opportunity, that's something that strikes me sometimes, because every installer that I know has quite a comfortable life. And you can start this with 22, 23, because then you're done, you have your master classes finished, and you're fully skilled to do this. Instead of saying, okay, I go to university, I'm done with 20, well, depends on where you are, but 24, 25, and you have invested so much more time, and it may be as fulfilling. That brings me to Europe. If we ask what Europe could do, would it be an opportunity to suggest to Europe a huge communication campaign on this whole sector? I mean, what can you do in it? What should you do in it? And because this means it's really 30 years of business for all of us.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think if we think about the structural change, so we need to push people into it, but we need to pull. So that's why, you know, I started at the very beginning saying we will not have fossil fuels heating our buildings in 15 years in Upper Austria. That's a fantastic pull device, because what that does is it says to every single trade and installer, you're not going to be doing that. Rescale. Just do it now, because the market is going to change. We need to do that at a European level. The words, the New Deal, the 1930s America, the stimulus of the New Deal, that was about employment. That was about stimulus, it was about employment, it was about infrastructure. The Green New Deal has to be about employment and infrastructure. It might be infrastructure in buildings, but that's really important. So I think it's very worrying, you know, sorry, it's not very worrying, but a big campaign without the nuts and bolts being right is a dangerous thing. Because what you need to have is that professional journey. You need to have the apprenticeships, you need to have the jobs, you need to have the stimulus, you need to have the money, and then you advertise it to get it used.
Europe has Erasmus Plus. Do we have a need for cross-European, cross-nationally trained installers, planners, architects?
I don't know. I don't think we do. I think I think if you have a plumber that's a good plumber in Germany, he's a good plumber in Spain, and he's a good plumber in Ireland. You might need to learn different languages, but I or she, and that's another problem in itself. But you know, I think
let's touch on that one a little bit. What do you all think about how could we make this sector and this segment more attractive to women? Because thinking very simply, also as a man, I would say, when you come in as a heat pump installer, it's dry already. Typically, the windows are in, so your environment in which you work is comfortable. When you go on the planner side, you have to use computers, you have to be skilled, you have to be knowledgeable, you can spend hours on detail if you want. You know, there's quite a few attractive bits and pieces in this building renovation part. And still, as I guess that's what you were pointing to, there is a huge dominance of male talent and a lack of female talent in this sector. So Karine,
I would say this.
You wouldn't say that, okay? But that's.
I mean, with Temondo, we tried to hire female installers for quite a while. We didn't even get applications, right? This whole trade seems to have a reputation of being a male-only environment, and looking back into my experience with a lot of them, the attitude towards women in the company was also a bit, let's say, tough, right? I mean, it's not like it's a welcoming environment for female workers joining it right now. That has to change from the heart of the people. They need to welcome female colleagues.
Karine, maybe you might enlighten us what you think.
No, I agree that the sector is suffering from a bad image. Well, not a bad image, but it's not that sexy, let's say. Yeah, it's considered to be that dominated by male and not really welcoming female. But I think there is maybe a kind of marketing campaign needed around that to show that it is changing, that the way we build buildings is not completely the same as it was 20 years ago, and that there are also not a lot of new jobs coming in when women could really have a good role to play, like positions related to BIM or this kind of new new jobs coming, BIM manager, and also all this. Also, the thing that we have to move away from this very fragmented sector to something that's more integrated. So with all these one-stop shops and people bringing together all the different stakeholders of the value chain, and in there maybe women could have a role to play in bringing together all the different actors and making them work more efficiently. Also I would like to remind that the construction sector is like 99% of SMEs, if I remember correctly. So it's heavily fragmented, and it's very difficult for innovation to penetrate there, and changing the mindset, also upskilling the workers is really key.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think when Karine hit one of the most important parts of this gender debate is this fragmentation. So where almost everyone is self-employed, it's all about it's an extremely risky, particularly I think Ireland is normal, but you know, you have a very high turnover of the number of companies. You have issues where construction companies don't get paid. You have this this level, you know, the UK saw it in Carillion, where you have this level of people who can compete for public tenders, and then they sub out to hundreds of small companies where they really squeeze. And if I was to use a word, I would use the word risk. And I think what we need the building renovation to scale up the building renovation, and I think, you know, one-stop shops have a huge part to play in this, is about de-risking the construction sector. Because if we want the construction sector to invest in long-term capacity, we need to think about how do we de-risk that. You know, you can't invest for something that's going to pay back in 3 years or 4 years if you have a 6-month horizon. You just cannot. So if we want the construction companies to go out and recruit apprentices who won't wash their face for 3 years, you know, and whether they're male or female, that needs to be de-risked. And if we can de-risk that so they can afford to have someone, you know, in the organization that they know will be there in 5 or 10 years time, then all sorts of other benefits come in terms of, you know, proper pensions and you know, if you're in the construction industry and you're thinking about, you know, I want to have children, I want to be able to take maternity leave, and if you're self-employed on a very risky basis and it's all casual work and casual contracts, that is even more challenging. And I think that has an element, not all of it, but I think it's certainly an element of the unattractiveness of the construction sector for men and women, but particularly women.
If I can add to this in terms of this risk and short-term planning horizon of these fragmented small companies, that is also a big issue for pushing innovation to the market, right? If you have a new innovative product, it is tough for one of these small companies to adopt it and to try to sell it and use it with the customer. If it's something new, they're not used to it, it's a hard time selling it, and they need to make sure it actually works. So they take a lot of risk in bringing innovation to their business. Whereas bigger companies will have budgets for innovation, like in the budget, it will have thousands of euros just for trying out things. And these small companies can't afford to do it. So going back to your question of where should we put the money, Thomas? I would say part of the money also needs to go into innovation and making these products scalable, cheaper and better and more efficient. So we actually have something that you can give the installers, the one-stop shops, whoever is going to use it in the end, a way to try it out and de-risk that trying it out of new innovative products.
Okay, and let's look at that for a second, or for this maybe the end 10-15 minutes of this discussion. The multiplication factor. We started by saying, okay, we have a huge challenge ahead of us. We have now seen that you are doing something, but you're doing it on a level that is still not sufficient to significantly increase the renovation rate. So where are the investors queuing at your doorstep, or people saying, hey, Paul, hey, Kristofer, hey, Karine, tell me, what should I do in order to deploy this logic in a different country? Because I can still count at two hands these solutions that we are deploying in Europe, where we would actually have to have 10 companies offering this in every city, in every major area.
Yeah, it's a really good question. You know, we get approached all the time by product vendors to specify their product, which is fine. And sometimes that involves some trialing and testing and so on. And I think one of the things that we've written into Super Homes 2030, our Horizon project, is an innovation specialist. So what we want to do is have someone in the supply chain that their job is to test, and a budget, as Christoph mentioned, a budget to do that testing and trialing so that we can see what happens. We need to do that for technology innovation. We need to do it for sales and marketing innovation and behavioral economics. And we need to do it for financing innovation. So, you know, we need to have an innovation budget for each of those pillars. And if you think about the challenge about the bank having loads of money and us having loads of customers that want it, and there's been this gap in between that we're trying to close, you need someone to go in there and get their hands dirty and try and fail less and try and succeed. You know, that is what we need to see. And I think, you know, Karine's mention of this incredibly fragmented SME sector means that is almost impossible unless we have aggregators and one-stop shops. Because that's the only way you're going to have the scale to test all of these innovative ways, whether it's innovative business models or innovative products.
I would say, Karine, what is the outcome of the stunning project in this respect? You have done all this comparison now, and what happens next?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, so we identified the one-stop shop as, let's say, the prerequisite to scale up renovation, but that it can be combined with all types of other business models like energy performance contracting, or other innovative schemes on smart financing, like the one experimented by the Europace project, on loans that are guaranteed by a local authority. So you have a lot of innovation on this side as well. But then for this to work, there needs to be a local actor or national actor that takes it up and put this one-stop shop in place. So you can be different kind of stakeholder. It can be again a local authority, but can also be put in place by a utility, an insurance company. In France, we also have examples of one-stop shops being set up by a consortium of SMEs. So this can also happen. It's really about the actors of the value chain to get together and get better organized to be able to provide those one-stop shops to the different market segments. And then again, to develop the messages around that to convince the building owner to embark on this journey, which is still, I think, a major barrier. The lack of, the informative barrier, I think, is one of the most difficult to overcome, because it's not technical, it's not financial, it's really getting a better understanding of human behavior in the end, and the way people take decisions. And I don't think there have been so much research into that yet. It's still difficult to understand how people make decisions, especially related to renovation.
Thomas, you asked about where are investors queuing up and where putting money in, right?
Yeah.
So sadly, if you look at classical venture capital investors and you're doing something physical, that is always a tough story because they are used to invest in software-driven business models that can scale around the world easily, and they have these nice hockey stick effects and they can make millions of it. And when you do something that is involving a lot of skilled labor work, that's tough to scale, it's slower, it is really, really hard to do fundraising. I mean, we've been lucky, we could raise a 5 million round just before the COVID pandemic started really surfacing in Europe. And but that wasn't too easy, and it's a lot of the regular investors that will pump up money into startups. They will not touch a business like Ecoworks because it's too complicated for them, too tough to understand, too hard to scale, too risky. And I guess it makes sense from their perspective because they have a lot of other cases where they can put their money in that seem to be scaling more easy, more reliable. But maybe then looking back to your question of where do we put money from a Green New Deal, it could also be leveraging investors and then reducing their downside risk because the upside potentials are gigantic in this industry. It's just all about like, how big is my downside? What happens if the company doesn't really take off? Where do I lose my cash here? And if funding can be used to support that downside protection, then maybe it allows more investors to support startups driving innovation in these areas.
You specify that a bit more. What is the downside? I mean, the downside then you don't renovate anything.
The downside is investor puts money into the company, like Ecoworks, and then we don't scale. We remain like a small project-driven business, but we don't become this multi-100 million, billion euro company, and they never make a real return on them and their investment. That's the downside.
You'd still be profitable. I mean, you would make money. You engage yourself in. I mean, it would work, right?
Yes, but venture capital investors, just being profitable is not enough for them, right? They will try to ask if they can tenfold, hundredfold their investment in a few years' time. That's kind of the
maybe we need an understanding of the philosophy, not only of the end user investor, but also of the venture capitalist. I would probably find it a hard time explaining that Brussels should do something securing somebody not to if they don't make a tenfold return on investment, right? They would say
just losing their investment. That's the downside for them. Like you put like a million euro in there and they're gone. That's the downside you have. The upside is you put €1 million in there and then in 8 years you have 100 million, right?
I'm with you there. Then I will go out and borrow $1 million if that's so easy.
It is not. In most of the case, they go bankrupt.
Yeah. I know the old. Wasn't it Richard Branson that said if you want to become a millionaire, you have to start as a billionaire in the airline business or something? I hope it's different here. Well, we are coming pretty much to a close. We had scheduled until 11:22, but I think we have covered most of the ground. Would you want to give any final remarks? And I'm checking with our questions here. We don't have a lot of them. So unless I cannot interpretate the interface here that I have, I do not have significant questions. I have one here that says, how good do heat pumps work in multifamily buildings? But I think the answer here, you can answer that if you want, is also we have a special webinar on that topic. So I would not devise time on this one here.
Let's just say it's getting better.
Getting better. They work.
No, if I can make.
Yeah.
What I think is really interesting, as I've toured around different parts of Europe and I've seen different pieces of innovation around heat pumps, you know, where you have a water loop in a multifamily building and each apartment has a small heat pump. You know, there's loads of different innovation going on, and what I think is really interesting is the technology is ripe for just so much innovation, you know, because the heart of a heat pump doesn't need to change, but it's about where do we take heat from and where do we give heat to, because, you know, there's so much potential in terms of waste heat and low grade heat that I have no doubt that if any of us walked around where we live, maybe not me in the middle of the countryside, but certainly in cities, there's waste heat everywhere. And what would be really interesting to do is to take, you know, and I think what's happening in some parts of Scandinavia, you think Stockholm or Växjö or whatever, putting in district cooling beside district heating, knowing that they're going to be running simultaneously. And you know, you could have a model where you're pulling heating from one to cool the other. You know, you can see that the technology has a huge amount of innovation ahead of it. And the challenge is, as Kristof mentioned, the venture capitalist, to do that innovation, needs to see that they will be rewarded. And the one way to do that is for Europe to signal very clearly, we will stop using fossil fuels for low-grade heat in 15 years' time or 20 years' time. Bang, you get all of the business models start to really push innovation into this sector. And that's what we need. We need the moonshot, and the moonshot is we are going to be off fossil fuels for low-grade heat in 15 years or 20 years. That's what it has to be.
I would also like to make a call for on the way getting there, because actually, you're totally right to say, Paul, but on the way going there, we will need to improve and put a price on carbon everywhere. And then talking about the tenants, they usually suffer from not being able to choose their heating system. They can't change it. Even if it's a decentral boiler in their flat, in their apartment, they're not allowed to change it. So they will suffer from this price on carbon. And what I think is really, really important, you have to charge it to the building owner. You cannot charge a tenant because he's not in charge. He can't do anything.
Okay, I will take these as great closing remarks. Karine, do you have a final message to the European Commission maybe that we can deliver?
No, specifically, I think everything has been very well covered, and conscious of time, I don't want to add too much.
Okay. Well then, thank you very much for your contribution this morning. I have made a lot of notes that I want to evaluate, because I think this can only be a start of a communication that we have to have with the European Commission to communicate better that there is huge opportunity in this sector, and that they can actually change something by communicating early that there is opportunity both for the end user investor, for the VC investor, for the building owner and operator. Thank you very much, and I hope for a continued cooperation. Have a nice day.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Thanks so much.
Bye-bye.